Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the STEM Swag podcast. I'm your host, Temple Lester, and today I am so excited to bring on our guest. She is one of my favorite people. I have been connected with her for such a long time. And if you've been following me for a while, you remember during quarantine when I used to do Instagram lives, and she was on there at one point. So I'm excited to re-interview her, know what she's done since that last interview, and just inform everyone who's new of the incredible things that she has accomplished. She deals with one of my biggest fears personally. So I'm going to bring her on. She's going to tell you what she does, and then I'm going to explain to you my fear. Please welcome Miss Corina Newsome.
Hi, everyone. Temple, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me back.
Of course, I am. So you've always been one of the people that I've followed and has inspired me in doing what you do and breaking many barriers, which people will learn about today. So firstly, for our audience, give us what you do, because you do a lot, but what I like to talk about, the natural nature, animal, just give us a brief description.
Yeah, so I'm a wildlife biologist, and my work spans a couple of different kind of fields. So obviously there's the science element of the work that I do. So my specialty is in bird conservation, avian studies, also known as ornithology. And so that's what my background is in. I'm also an educator, so I love to share wildlife, nature, connect people with the world around them. So my work includes educating the public. And then a lot of my work also includes some of the not so exciting parts of sending lots of emails and being on meetings with folks who are helping to do conservation on the ground across the country. So a lot of the work that I do now is making sure that the work that we do for conservation to ensure that wildlife and birds survive in a changing world is also benefiting people, human communities who are also vulnerable to the same environmental issues that wildlife are vulnerable to. So that's a quick synopsis of the work that I do.
So if you guys are wondering, my biggest irrational fear are birds. And I don't remember if this was during our live during quarantine or I was just doing a live. I had a bird on my shoulder while we did the live. Yeah. And it was one of the scariest moments of my life.
You're very brave.
Yes, and you're the reason I know what an ornithologist is, person who studies. So I think that's really interesting. So my first question, as this is a STEM Swag podcast about the importance of women and minorities in STEM, is my entire mission. What is your STEM journey? What got you into becoming an ornithologist and talking about the importance of conservation of land and birds and into your path?
Yeah, that's a great question. So growing up, I've always loved wildlife, and I knew from probably the age of 4 that I wanted to work with animals in some way, but I hadn't really seen examples of what that looked like besides, veterinarians. And so that's kind of what I assumed I would do going throughout, middle school, high school. And then right before I was about to go to college, I got an internship at the Philadelphia Zoo, which is my hometown zoo. And the lead keeper for carnivores, which is like the coolest job you can have, she was a Black woman. And I never even imagined that I would see a Black person, let alone a Black woman, in a position like that. And she changed my whole perspective on what I thought was possible for me. I didn't realize how much I had kind of counted myself out of jobs like that until I saw her doing it. I was like, oh my goodness, I never even considered this kind of work. And so at that point, I went on to major in college in zoo and wildlife biology. I got lots of hands-on experience working with all kinds of animals like parrots and birds of prey like owls and hawks, snakes. I was terrified of snakes, right? The first day they told me how they feed the snakes. They open this freezer full of dead frozen mice. I said, I can't. Count me out, take me off the roster, right?
I would quit right then.
I could not. I was like, it's over for me. And the guy who was training me, he said, you'll be licking these mice by the end of the week. And he was almost right. I never licked them. But yeah, like once I started doing it, I was like, oh, I'm brave enough for this. I can do it. And so I got all kinds of hands-on experience. And so after graduating college, my first job was as a zookeeper. And I was a zookeeper for the first kind of, period of my career so far for about 4 years. And in that kind of position, I was doing a lot of what you think of when you think of a zookeeper. So it's obviously the scooping poop and cleaning and taking care of animals in that way, right? Very gross. I've gotten very used to all kinds of gross things over the years. But it's also fun things like animal training animals in their care.
Yeah. So a couple things from that is two things that you talk about. One, growing up and you only thought you would have to be a veterinarian in animal things. And that goes into a lack of what we know is like STEM diversity in different fields in STEM when people just think of maybe a doctor or an astronaut, when there's so many other things out there that there is a lack of exposure to for many different people. And then also seeing someone who looks like you and a representation when there's always a lack of representation in STEM related fields for Black people and women and Black women together. So having that person for you that really kind of changed the pathway that you were on.
It changed everything. I don't know what I would have done or what I would be today if I had not encountered that one person changed the whole trajectory for me.
Absolutely. And that's what we're all about, raising diversity, raising inclusion, bringing inclusion to these fields that nobody has heard of, like ornithology. Until I found you, and I was just like, what does this mean? And it took me a minute to remember or know how to say it correctly. I was like, I was just so confused. So just having people out there to be role models for younger people to know that there's so much more out there for them than what they see and what they know.
Yeah.
And a big thing that I've talked about on this podcast is mentorship. Who are those people that kind of mentored you if they were in the STEM field or were not just an important person in your life, like the zookeeper?
Yeah. So I have had lots of mentors over the course of my career so far. And, after I kind of moved out of animal care and zookeeping, I went back to school for my master's degree in biology. And I was so scared because I had been out of school for 4 years. I didn't know if I could do the math anymore, all those things. And so mentorship was very important. And so I had kind of collected, so to speak, as particularly Black people, but also people just from my academic journey from when I was in getting my bachelor's degree, teachers that I had, right, who really like poured into me. And they're like, you can do this, you were prepared for this, they just encouraged me. And then when I had questions along the way when I was in school, because I was learning a whole lot, I was going into ecosystems I had never even seen before, like the salt marsh here in Georgia, encountering species I had never seen before. And so these people were just like giving me the knowledge I needed to equip me to make it through grad school. And I loved grad school. Let me be clear. Some people hear, the phrase grad school and they're like, ooh, I loved it. And it's, if you want to do it, absolutely do it. And that's where I was really studying birds out in their natural habitat out in the salt marsh. And using cameras and camera traps to look at them, spy on animals, so we can see the things that we usually can't see if we're walking outside, walking out there. And then after that, I was able to publish my research, kind of go the whole cycle of doing wildlife research and academic research. And now that I've graduated, I have mentors, the same mentors that I had in grad school, the same mentors I had even as a zookeeper. I keep them. They are staying with me my whole career journey. And so the more relationships you can build along the way, keep up with them. They may help you through one season, but they, in the next season, you may find a way for them to pour into you in new and different ways. So mentorship is very important for preparedness and motivation.
Yes, absolutely. And it's good to hear somebody say that they enjoyed grad school. It's one of your favorite parts of education, because people don't usually talk about that. They talk about undergrad, the grad school. So I think that is super interesting. Now, one question that I do have, and I bet everyone else has as well, is what is a regular day for an ornithologist? What are you doing out there? And I've seen videos of you in the craziest places, examining the craziest things. So what is a regular day or a normal day in your field?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, I have to say that ornithologists do all kinds of jobs. And so depending on what you do, that day can look very different. But for me, when I was in the field, the day was very muddy, very wet, very sweaty, right? Again, these things sound bad, but I loved it. I enjoyed it. So during the field seasons that I was in, I would get up, usually very early in the morning. I would pack all my stuff in my duffel bag that I carried on my back, my water, my measurement supplies, my writing utensils, everything, right? Waterproof notebooks. And I would literally trek out into the salt marsh, just literally straight from the road into the marsh. And a marsh is a flooded grassland, essentially, is what it looks like. And so I would walk out there knee deep in mud, looking for sparrow nests, and I would be out there making sounds like psh, 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 to try and figure out where the birds were, right? Probably crazy from the road, but literally going through grass, finding nests, counting eggs, measuring how far the nests are off the ground, all these kind of little bits of information that I needed to collect about the birds when I was out in the field. However, when it's not the field season or in the kind of season of my career that I'm in now, most of the time I'm indoors. I'm actually indoors, like I mentioned earlier, like doing a lot of coordinating work, working with biologists in different parts of the country, helping to organize the data that we collect about wildlife to help us make conservation decisions, leading trainings with biologists to help them understand, okay, how can we incorporate information, data about human communities to help us prioritize where we invest our money, where we invest our time to ensure that our ecosystems are healthy, right? So a lot of it is less on the technical side in the field, getting muddy and dirty and sweaty, more behind the computer, working with people. But biology and conservation and even ornithology specifically does kind of span that whole spectrum of working at a desk and working out in the middle of the sun, sweat, heat, rain, all of that.
So speaking of that, and kind of you talk about Georgia, and I'm in Atlanta, but in my backyard we kind of have this creek thing, and there's recently been, I want to assume it's a blue heron. It's really tall. It's blue. It's kind of scary. It flew the other day. I saw this and I just got so scared. It flew all the way down from a tree, and it's been watching this duck family. And I think I sent you the video of it too.
Yes.
But it's watching this duck family. And the mom and dad are trying to hide the baby ducks. But one time they disappeared. So we thought he or she, the heron, had ate the ducks. But now the mom and dad duck are trying to hide it.
Yeah. I think you're spot on with the species. The height, the color, probably a great blue heron is what I would call that. And they absolutely eat ducklings. So the mom and dad duck are wise to hide the babies.
Yes.
Yeah, great blue herons, if you've never seen them, you guys, like they are probably, 3 to 4 feet tall, very tall birds. I think they're beautiful. I love herons of all kinds, but if you're not a bird fan, I can see why you would not necessarily love to see them in your backyard.
Ducklings and the duck family are having to watch for this bird that was watching them from the trees and saw it's time to swoop down and went and just stared at them. And I was just so scared.
It can be hard to watch. It can. Yep.
The circle of life, it's nature. It's what's going to happen. I just can't watch it, but I know it's going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
So my question is, what got you interested into birds specifically, starting out from a zookeeper and just studying biology and zoo animals, then moving directly into birds?
Yeah. So I didn't have a particular interest in birds like growing up or really through college, but because I was a biology major in the wildlife sector, we had to take ornithology as a required class. So when you go to college, of course, there are some classes that you can kind of choose if you want to take them. Others are required for the major. Ornithology was required. And I was excited for all my required classes, like mammalogy, study of mammals, herpetology, study of reptiles and amphibians, right? Like all those classes. But ornithology was the one I did not want to take because you had to memorize so many birds. And I didn't even know there were that many. I didn't pay attention to local birds, right? So when I was hearing from the older students, like, oh yeah, we had to memorize 300 birds. I said, 300 where? What 300, right? I didn't even know there were that many birds. And then you had to be able to identify them by sound, right? I'm like, this is going to drop my GPA significantly. I just knew it. And then I got into class, and on the very first day, my teacher, and this kind of gets it, he's now one of my closest mentors. He was so excited, like in a weird way. I was like, I've never seen anyone so, like, he would tear up thinking about certain. I'm like, this is bizarre, right? But as soon as he started introducing like all these local birds, the blue jay was the one that really caught my eye. I caught the bug, right? It was like it jumped onto me. And ever since then, I've been just as weird as him, super excited about birds. And so at that point, I knew that even if it was just a hobby, I wanted to pay attention to birds for the rest of my life. But thankfully, as a zookeeper, I got the opportunity to take care of dozens and dozens of species of birds, ranging from storks and herons to raptors and parrots, right? Everything in between, falcons. And that kind of nurtured my love for birds because I was working with birds from all over the world. And I was like, okay, I know I want to do something to help birds. I want to contribute to their ability to survive in a changing world because climate change, destruction of their habitat, all kinds of things are happening that are threatening their existence. And so that's what motivated me to then go to grad school and study birds academically, specifically.
So yeah, we shout out to your professor.
Right.
But talking more about why you do it and why you do what you do with conservation of just the earth, why is that important to you? And what effect do you see in your everyday life working in the environment?
Yeah, I realized, for me, wildlife is fun. So that's when I was a kid, that's the thing that attracted me. Like, wildlife are just cool. Not everyone thinks that, right? But I naturally kind of just had this affinity for animals, and I, nurtured, and my parents and family nurtured that over many years. But I started to understand that, the threats that wildlife were facing, which I naturally cared about because I really cared about wildlife, was also impacting people in a really urgent way. And I grew up in Philadelphia, and many of the places where I went to school, where I traveled, where I lived, like there was really bad pollution issues, right? For example, like several environmental issues, but one of the big ones was pollution from like cars and industry. And I remember, and I didn't even realize this until actually recently, but I would get so sick from fumes outside that I missed so much school. Like there was one school year where I missed like half the days, right? So like there are impacts of not taking care of the earth around us, of the world around us, on not just wildlife, but on people. And I didn't even think about the ways it was impacting me, but I was seeing how it was impacting other people. And one of the other things I noticed as I got, grew in my profession and, entered the working world, I was like, all these people who are concerned about wildlife conservation and doing all this work, raising money, doing the science, I don't hear anyone talking about the people that live in the very same places that these wildlife are living in. Thinking, how can we do the most we can for people in our addressing wildlife issues? And given the fact that they overlap quite a bit, it's really important that you think about both those things at the same time. And so recognizing how intertwined our lives and our health is with the lives and health of wildlife and the ecosystems that we share, I knew that I needed to bring my perspective, which I found out was pretty unique among people. I was typically one of very few women in my classes and was always the only Black person and the only non-white person, actually. So I found myself being the only one in the room on a regular basis, asking these questions like, well, what about the people? How do we solve these problems in a way that benefits all of us? And so that's one of the reasons why, as you mentioned, like ensuring that Black and brown and indigenous people, minorities, women are here is because we have a perspective that is required for us to solve these problems. And if we're not in the room, if we're not contributing to the solutions, we won't have any solutions.
Absolutely. That was good. I can't help but agree to everything that you just said, and having your own perspective in a room of people who may have the same perspective, and you bring that difference that may change an entire thing that affects society or affects just one person, and changing that for somebody. Another question, getting back into kind of your profession, how did you become an ornithologist? Like, we talk about school, but what did you do afterwards? Did you go on LinkedIn to connect with somebody? What was the way of finding your job?
That's a great question. So for me, because I started in the animal care field in zookeeping, there are different kind of job boards for wildlife jobs in particular. And so, for example, one of them, if you want to be a keeper and you want to work with birds that way, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums has a job board, and you can search by birds, you can search by location, right? So you can look for jobs that are animal care and bird focused. There are other job boards like the Texas A&M Wildlife Job Listserv, I believe, or board, similarly named. You can find all kinds of jobs, especially ones where you go out in the field. So if you want to be someone who's outside, like in the natural habitat of birds, you would go to a job board like that and search for, they're usually called field technician positions, where it's like you're the person that's going out, holding the birds, putting bands on their legs, taking measurements, like all of those really detailed technical things, collecting the data. And so there are very specialized job boards. It can sometimes be hard to find if you don't, this is another reason why mentorship is important. If you don't have anyone to kind of direct your attention to the places, it can be very hard to find these opportunities. So that's one of the reasons why I was so grateful for my mentors, because they told me about these job boards, and that is how I applied for those positions.
Okay. And it took you to where you are. So mentorship is key. That's one thing I've learned from every single episode of this podcast about having people to look up to and to also make you better at what you do and elevate you. Um, so yeah. So I want to get into our game. I mentioned a game earlier, but I think this is a great time to get into the game. And it's going to be show and tell.
Nice.
So I'm going to show you a picture, and you're going to explain to me what this picture is saying, what it means, what was happening at the time. And I want to start off with one of my personal faves. I did a deep dive on your Instagram on this one.
That's so funny. Okay, so this is on Little St. Simon's Island in Georgia. So Georgia has islands off the coast. I didn't know that, so I moved here.
You didn't? Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
very. Yeah, and this is a sunrise beach walk that I was doing. Freezing cold. It was still like early spring, and this was the first ever jellyfish that I'd ever seen in the wild. It wasn't alive, unfortunately, but it was just on the beach. And I picked it up. I don't recommend doing this. Do not pick up jellyfish if you don't know what the species is. Many of them are very toxic, but that's what it was.
Yeah.
Very cool. Oh, and it was like hard. It was like very, like they're hard. Yeah.
Was it because it was dead, or is that just how it is? Oh.
That's just how that species is. I can't remember what it was called, but yeah, they're hard.
I wouldn't call it a jellyfish then if it was hard. I don't think it's very jelly of it. But you are just so much more brave than I am when it comes to nature. If I saw that, I would have moved out the way and kept walking.
That's the right thing to do. So
don't be like her. Caution. Don't do this at home.
Right.
All right. Here's my second picture.
Oh yeah. So that picture. So during the first Black Birders Week, which was in 2020, which was an organizing event that a group of Black folks that I was a part of, who are birders, put on to just kind of help build community in the birding world, for Black folks. And someone named Elisa, she was so kind as to like paint this picture of me just as a gift, like just for no reason. And then Birding Magazine picked up on it and asked her and me if they could use it as the cover to that issue. And so they put that picture as the issue image on the front of their magazine, which I was so shocked and honored by. But it's the most beautiful piece of art I have ever received, and I am always so grateful for it.
Yes. Can you explain to us what birding is?
Yes, good question. So birding is literally just the act of going outside, or you don't have to be outside. I do it through the window, but watching birds or listening to birds, just the act of paying attention to them. It's very simple. Probably doesn't need its own verb all the time, but yeah, just enjoying birds.
Because I know when a lot of people think about kind of bird watching, I think of like TV shows from when I was little in like New York, and they would be out maybe like looking at, or just somewhere in a park with a group of people looking at different types of birds. And then I found ornithology was a thing. And I think Black Birder Week in 2020 was how I found you, because that was a really big thing as well that kind of blew up and got a lot of attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really one of the greatest kind of organizing moments I've ever been a part of. And I have a whole bunch of new friends now from that, including you, which I'm so grateful for.
Thank you. All right, and this is my last picture.
Oh, yeah. So that is a picture of me when I was a zookeeper at the Nashville Zoo, and that hawk is called a Harris's hawk. His name is Diego, and we trained him to fly outside like unassisted, and so this was me getting him ready to fly outside. And so we would sometimes like take him on walks, like we just let him fly up in a tree, and he would just follow us around the zoo. And so that the process of getting him ready included putting some equipment on his ankles to help us keep track of him. We would put little telemetry, or it's almost like a little tracking device, so we could know where he is at all times.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was my last picture, but I have a question. And leading off of that picture, what is your favorite species of bird?
It's a great question. My favorite species is the blue jay, and that's because it was the first bird that kind of got me hooked onto birds when I took that class in college. And they're just so beautiful. Like they're, all these brilliant shades of blue and white and black, and they're mimics. Actually, they're in the same family as crows and ravens, and they can mimic sounds almost better than parrots, I would say. Like they're very good at that kind of stuff. Yeah. So blue jays are just fascinating, and they will always have my loyalty.
Yeah. Would you ever own a parrot? I feel like as an ornithologist, you need to own a type of bird in the house.
Absolutely not. I would literally never own a bird. I think when I was a zookeeper and I realized how much time and attention birds need, especially like parrots and crows, right? Like I was like, oh, you can't come home with me. Yeah, I need a break. So it's like having a full-time child, except it's a bird.
Yeah. And quickly, I want to go back to blackbirding because my mind always goes back to that when I think of you and just kind of how would you interpret and describe the impact or the way you're trying to create an impact on inclusion in birding and
Yeah.
making this more aware and making more people know about this?
Yeah, I think one of the most important parts of the work that I do and what Black Birders Week is, it happens every year actually, around Memorial Day, but it's the fact that a lot of us, when we would go birding where we live locally, we were like often the only Black people in these groups, and it like most of the people were like retired white folks, right? And so we just did not necessarily have people like us to kind of connect with, and that kind of also produced encounters with racism and classism, all kinds of stuff, right? And that's actually how Black Birders Week came about, with someone's experience with that. And so what Black Birders Week did is it showed us like there are other Black people who bird, and it like I literally had never met a Black birder until just before Black Birders Week. Like I was shocked. I was like, what? I've never seen, right? And it turns out we're everywhere. And so it built this like community, this network, and created spaces where we can have educational events for us. We can have science events for us and outreach events, all kinds of stuff where we are creating safe spaces on purpose for us to be able to enjoy the beauty of birds.
Yeah, I think that is so incredible. And again, with the inclusion in different fields of STEM and more people knowing about those fields is something that we kind of brought up multiple times today. And I think that's important. And I think my last question for you is just for everyone watching. Have you faced any challenges in doing what you do and coming up from school? And how have you dealt with those and succeeded from those?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest challenges was everything was new. So I always want to encourage people that just because you've never done something or you have no experience with something doesn't mean you shouldn't try it or do it. Even the job I have now, like everything that I do, so much of it was learning on the job or learning on the go. And one of the things I was worried about was that I was from very urban area, the city. And when I was essentially transplanted to coastal Georgia, like I had never seen ecosystems like this, right? I was afraid. I was in the country, right? I'm from the city. I don't do these things. You know what I mean? So there was almost a little bit of a fear of stepping into this new territory that I just didn't know how to navigate this new world. And the other piece with confidence around like going back to school, right? It was really important that I had certain skills. I had to know how to do statistics, right? I had to know how to do the science, and I just hadn't done it for a while, right? And so what I needed to do was tap into my network of support, my community, right? My mentors, my friends who are currently in grad school, right? To kind of get inspiration and get the confidence that I needed. And it's really important to surround yourself with people that you trust, even if they're not necessarily in your field, but they've kind of been through similar, rigor, right? Maybe they've gone to grad school for something, a different field of study, right? They can still pour into you. It's really important to have people that you trust. Who can support what you're doing and give you encouragement when your confidence might be low. And yeah, I do it even if you're afraid. Fear is not a bad thing inherently. You just have to move with it. Do the thing in spite of the fear.
Yes, absolutely. Great advice. Great advice. All right. So one thing that I have everybody who comes on the podcast do is I get them to say STEM girl swag with their most STEM and swag. And I want you to say with your most ornithologist, urban, and mix of coastal, just anything for everyone else.
Okay. All right. STEM girl swag.
Yay. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It was so much fun to have you. And you were one of my first interviews during quarantine. So to bring that back, it's a full circle moment.
It was such an honor, Temple. I'm just so proud of everything that you're doing, and it's always an honor whenever I can be part of it in even the smallest possible way. But I'm watching you, girl, and you're an inspiration even for those of us who are older than you and further along in life. You are inspiring all of us. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And stay connected with her right here, Hood Naturalist on Instagram. Thank you so much, Miss Corina Newsome, for joining me.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you all for watching another episode of the STEM Swag podcast. I love Miss Corina Newsome. She is so incredible with all the things that she does and has taught me so much about in STEM fields I didn't even know about. So thank you to her. Make sure you subscribe, like, and comment. Tell me your favorite thing that you have learned, and follow my Instagram at Just Temple. Bye.